Giulia, it's nice to be in conversation with you. Where are you calling in from today?
Hi, Natalie. Great to be here. And I'm calling in from London, the rainy London.
Well, I'm glad to be chatting with you. And just before our call, I was going back over some of the articles that you've written on the LSE blog, ChatGPT one, about how it's changing the ways in which we relate to and conceive of law, and then the more recent one, which I'll also link to in the show notes, about the digitisation of the justice system. But before we get to all that juicy stuff, I want to ask you the question that I always open these conversations with. And that's, what do you think is going on in the global human psyche right now?
Very great question, Natalie. It's a complex matter, and I think that clearly there are some profound changes that are taking place that are based on a conflict, I think, between, so to say, different ways of approaching life. I don't know what the outcome will be of this transformative journey, but clearly, I think we're experiencing a crisis of traditional ways of looking at society, of looking at what's the role of the individual in the society, and I think AI and its impact on the society is really playing into that as well.
So, from your perspective in the world of law, how do you see the general context unfolding in response to AI, technology, algorithms? Like, what are the key things that you've noticed that you think people should be aware of?
I think that AI is having already a profound influence on our everyday lives, as well as on regulators, the market, and the law in itself. AI has enormous potential, is putting in a way, the input and the abilities of humans into perspective, because clearly AI can, in some cases, even outperform humans. So inevitably, this creates reflections, but also to a certain extent a crisis, let's say, of some dogmas, some mantras that have governed our societies, as well as the law in a way. But how the law is responding to these challenges, I think that thus far we haven't seen a real strong and effective response. And this is, of course, a choice of regulators, in the sense that regulators could decide to act in a more Herculean way, we could say, in a more effective and also reactive way to the technology. And this, of course, tells something about how AI could shape the markets, could shape our lives, and in itself, it can be for certain aspects also quite problematic in my view. So I think that, in essence, to summarize, the law hasn't done what it should be doing in my from my perspective.
And is that mostly because it's quite slow to keep up? I'll take that again. And is it also because it's a bit slower to keep up, the fact that there are so many different procedural elements that make lawmaking and the changing of laws kind of go through due procedure, or is it something else? Are there various
I
factors at play?
and that's a brilliant question, in the sense that you touch upon, I think, two of the sides of the law. One of them, of course, is procedures, in the sense that the law is grounded in procedures, which means that there should be, of course, due debate. There are, in many cases, also different readings for the different legislators, both at the national and international level. And the different readings, of course, can inevitably also impact the speed at which the legislation is adopted. But I think that what we're facing here is a more fundamental challenge, which is a challenge of values and therefore a political challenge, in the sense that there is quite a I would say controversy surrounding what the role of AI should be in society, which doesn't necessarily find the agreement, of course, of civil society, in particular from the perspective of AI-driven companies, who of course see regulation as an obstacle for innovation. And on the other side, of course, we may have regulators who are highly influenced as well by these views, because inevitably the AI market has a huge potential, a significant potential from the perspective of expansion of markets, as well as economic growth and wealth. So inevitably what we're witnessing, in my view, in some jurisdictions, is a tension between so to say, favoring innovation and expanding the AI market versus, of course, some very tangible and concrete concerns and challenges that have emerged in the last years when it comes to AI. And it seems to me that the balance is tilting in favor of innovation and market concerns over very essential I would say problematic aspects of AI from the perspective of individual rights and protection for the more vulnerable.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I remember when we had a chat before this conversation, and in a few other conversations I've had with other folks, this question of the kind of, it's the framing of a battle between innovation and regulation, which I fundamentally disagree with, which is that innovation doesn't have to sit within a context where there are no constraints. That's the whole point of innovation. It's kind of coming up against constraints, finding a new way through, and being creative and imaginative. And if we think about things like regulation, creating greater safety in the car industry, in flying, like that sometimes these constraints create innovations which are much better, that far surpass the innovations that might otherwise have come about, and at much less cost than if people had been able to just go and just cause damage, lives lost, etc. So can you speak a bit to that? Because it's such a weird framing that we go in this very binary approach where actually I think we're missing the richer picture.
I think that it's a very nice way of putting it, in the sense that it's a matter also of nuances and balance, in the sense that, as you rightly said, not everything is black and white, and regulation has never been black or white, because the law is not black and white. The law is really, in a way, the channeling through words that shape behavior in the society, when it comes to individuals, when it comes to operators, when it comes to companies, when it comes even to public bodies, to achieve, of course, certain objectives. And inevitably the objectives are polycentric, because the society in itself embodies different values, different interests. So when we talk about AI regulation as opposed to innovation, I think we're missing a big part of the story. And in a way, it's a narrative that it lacks nuances, lacks also, in a way, a balance, and is not reflective of what the law does. It is true, of course, that the law can put guardrails, but these guardrails are not intrinsically contrary to innovation. So you gave us very good examples of tools, but even one can say household items. Think about washing machines, or even other products and means of transport. Think about trains, think about cars, right? And the fact that the producers of these items, of these tools, need to ensure some safety standards, doesn't mean nonetheless that there cannot be any innovation. So I think that, again, this very one can say, bipolar, almost bidimensional narrative, either innovation or regulation, I think is really missing the bigger picture.
I think the other thing that also comes to my mind is the fact that when we're thinking about physical objects, the harms are much more easy to point out, right? So, like when we're thinking about AI, a lot of the harms that we're talking about are not visible in a tangible way to the naked eye. We're talking about potentially encroachments on people's privacy, on their rights. Maybe if we're talking about the inbuilt biases and prejudices, we're talking about also discriminatory kind of experiences for people where they don't necessarily know that they're being discriminated against. There's no recourse to change that. What are some of the biggest issues you see in terms of the harms that not regulating AI could kind of like permit to happen?
I think that the harms, in a way, are becoming even more evident. Even I would say among the public, among um, um, society at large, in the sense that it's true that many of them are intangible. When you think about privacy, traditionally, so to say, we think about the state having a duty to protect our private sphere, our private life from interferences, undue interferences, and therefore, in a way, we conceptualize privacy from the state. But I think that the emergence of powerful social media and platforms has shown that privacy can be attacked also by private actors, not necessarily only by the state. So
Yeah.
the sensitivity is slowly changing. But having said that, I think that there are some areas in which, having talked to many students, but also many people at the conferences, at the events that I've been speaking at, what emerges is that, for example, a serious concern for the population, for workers in particular, is how AI could replace them. And these worries are really coming up in all fields. This is a very transversal, I think, concern that should ring an alarm for all of us. Should really be a signal that something from a regulatory perspective should be done.
Yeah.
And the inaction of regulators from this perspective is starting generating some serious anxiety among workers. So this is clearly an area where, based on my interactions as well as my research, we see that the harm is becoming more and more tangible, and I think
Yeah.
it's concretizing itself also through some very powerful actions. Think about the strike that actors in Hollywood have been engaging in, whereby we see that actors are becoming increasingly concerned that their image could be simply scanned and then adapted for different movies, for different productions, without the human touch. And this is, I think, a very powerful example of how AI is becoming a concern for society. And of course, I mean, this is a concern that has been voiced also by other types of workers, not necessarily Hollywood actors. And I think that, point being that no matter what the source is, so to say, of the concern and how it can be voiced and put to the attention of the regulators, I think that this is a welcome development, in the sense that perhaps there could be a spillover effect where some workers that may be more powerful and also more vocal than others can nonetheless also help to voice also other types of workers' concerns in this area.
Yeah. thinking about where to go on next from this point, because there's so many things to explore here. I was listening to various conversations around, I think it was the Nate Hagens and Daniel Schmachtenberger on the Great Simplification. I think it was them. And one of the things that was raised was, again, back to your point around values and how the AI and technology question really isn't so much a technology question per se, but a societal, civilizational, and actually I think it is a civilizational question. I mean, it scales up that widely, and also planetarily, if you want to think about the ecological impacts
Of course.
and cost,
Yes.
which are currently being written off as externalities, which makes no sense because it's not external to our living planet. So it's like, well, anyway, but the point that they were making was about values and societal approaches or country-based approaches to AI and what could potentially happen. And I wonder if this will happen. We've seen this in China already, is that certain uses of AI in certain countries have already been regulated for. And so you'll potentially end up in a situation where certain territories, countries, nation states will have a set of regulations that are more or less oriented towards the flourishing of their society, towards a stable society, where perhaps, for example, GDP is compromised a bit because obviously if you have short-term wins where companies can just outsource everything to AI and cut their costs and not employ humans, whatever the industry, you're going to end up with a spike in short-term profits, but then massive unemployment and all sorts of social problems, versus countries that maybe slow that down or potentially even go a degrowth sort of route where they prioritize people being employed, having a set of regulations that enable folks to have dignified, full lives, and how those countries are likely to be better places to live and therefore more resilient and economically and politically more stable than the countries that take the other route. And obviously at the moment, this is kind of in the realm of the imaginal, like fantasizing some particular outcomes. But I wonder what your thoughts are around which countries or regions, for instance, the EU versus the US, are taking perhaps a more social, values-driven approach to the role that law can take in creating one or the other reality. Like, where's the good stuff happening? Do you see places where there's a cause for optimism?
I think, I mean, of course, what you're describing is, as you rightly point out, still far away, but not that far away. So I think that we are at the edge, really, of a very powerful transformation, and this is why I believe that the regulatory choices that will be made now, at a point in time in which so to say, there's still some leeway for governing the AI phenomenon, will really shape the future. Now, having said that, I think that what is crucial about AI is that because it's in the hands of a handful of companies, and that have, of course, an incisive power on the markets and on the society to deploy these tools. What we can see is inevitably that there will be developments that might favor the fewer over the majority of the society. There might be nonetheless some positive developments that might, in a way, open up perhaps technology that might open up some possibilities for the majority, for the society at large. And we can think, of course, about many developments in different fields. So not all is bleak and dark, but nonetheless, looking at the different perspectives and the different fields, it is quite likely that AI will simply strengthen and solidify some power dynamics in the market that might make, so to say, the vulnerable more vulnerable, and we can say the more powerful even more powerful. And inevitably, AI therefore will is quite prone, so to say, to foster these imbalances in the society. And the result of this will be a society that is more unequal, that is more, so to say, disempowered, on a larger scale because of the asymmetries that exist when it comes to AI, the opaqueness of algorithms that really don't allow individuals to engage fully with the technology and therefore also have a say on the technology. And you have to think about also the following, that AI and algorithms take decisions in the time frame of a fraction of seconds, right? So these decisions that are so quick and are so one can say apparently inherently correct because based on science and data, have of course disruptive effects on the society, not only from the perspective of how power is exercised, but also in a way we can say the perception that the public has about power and science, in the sense that imagine the application of AI in the justice field. Potentially we could see AI systems that may adopt decisions about very important human and controversial even topics in the space of few seconds. And this decision that may have very powerful implications for not only the individual but also society at large will be based on data and algorithms and decisions that have been, so to say, made more algorithmic, more numerical, taking away, so to say, all the debate, all the, in a way, participation and even possibility for input that parties tend to have in litigation. So inevitably, these procedures that are automated will also reshape the perception that the public has when it comes to power, in this case, judicial power. But of course, this applies to all fields.
Yeah. And I think also connected to that, and this is something that I think you've written about before, is also the trust that the public do or don't have in the justice system. Obviously, trust is a big question. And I think one of the things about the ways in which people think about the law, it's connected with how they feel about the police, how they feel about the government, how they feel about whether or not they're going to have a fair hearing. And so if you suddenly get rid of law courts, which is something that you mentioned last time, like, what are some of the risks that you see there if we digitize everything?
I think that so there are different challenges, and I think that the first challenge is the fact that the values of technology are not necessarily aligned with those of the law in this very current stage in which we are operating, in the sense that the law is grounded in reasoning, is grounded in balancing as well of different values, of different interests, of different rights. And in itself, this is not a mathematical operation. It's about interpretation. It's about also contingencies, in the sense that there may be different aspects of different cases that play into the equation, if we will, of the interpretation of the law, and therefore judges in particular can reach a certain outcome based on the different factors of that specific case. So there's an element of individuality, so to say, individual cases that are to be differentiated from other cases, and that therefore, in a way, also diverge from the, so to say, consolidated case law. So there's an element of exceptionalism in the law as well. But algorithms and AI cannot capture this exceptionalism that in many cases is grounded on considerations of equity, on considerations of fundamental rights protection, on considerations also of sometimes public interests that come into play. So in my view, the law and AI are not aligned. We're talking about two very different, so to say, sets of ways of thinking. And in my view, there's a clash here, and it would be extremely challenging to align the law, to make the law, transform the law into mathematics, into data that can be fed into the algorithm. So I think there's a very practical challenge here. That will take many years. So beyond the practical challenge, there's also the time frame challenge, in the sense that it might take years before we can have well-trained algorithms that could be deployed. So by that time, perhaps the technology might be already outdated. So all the efforts and investment, the financial investments that we will need to put to create this technology might be well lost at that point in time. And then, of course, there's the more societal dimension, in the sense that, again, how do we feel as a society to be subjected to automated decision making, to automated legal advice? Think about AI that could be used, for example, to partially at least automate also the work of lawyers. Are we basically paying algorithms to give us advice? Or essentially, in a way, we also need perhaps to have some human interaction around some very personal and complex problems that might affect our lives and need, of course, to be solved through law and legal means that are necessary to ensure a certain degree also civilization in our society, right? So I think that we're really looking at some very, I would say, powerful transformations that are shaking, in a way, also the foundations of many professions, but also society. And the trust, I think, point that you raise is very important, in the sense that everyone can have different answers to the question, do we trust more humans or algorithms? But I think that in a way, giving up our perhaps our power and our role in society to simply and blindly embrace science, I think it's quite disempowering, right? Now, talking from a very, so to say, almost psychological perspective, it seems to me that well, we're giving up. We don't trust ourselves any longer. I don't know what would be your take on that, but it seems to me that that would be ultimately the result, the larger implication of this transformation, that we're giving up on humanity in a way.
Yeah. There's something about outsourcing the difficult decisions. And it kind of comes, what comes to my mind is what you're saying about the legal process, the deliberation that has to happen, the discussion, looking at exceptions, thinking about the current times as well, and how to respond in the moment with a future in mind, and not just retrospectively based on historical data, which is obviously how algorithms make decisions. Like, training data is not future data. And yes, of course, there might be a correlation between data that you have now and potential likely paths forward, but it lacks the potential to envision and then take decisions to create futures in which greater flourishing can happen. And some folks would probably say, well, you can code this in. Yes, great, let's do it. But the problem is that most folks who are working in the domains where the technology is being trained, where it's being developed, we don't have representation. We don't even have representation of physically human systems of law. Like, how much variety do you see at judge level or in the House of Lords? That you really don't see as much variety as is present in the wider population. And so one thing that I know that you talk about, and I want to get to language as well, because that's another thing, which is, law is created by putting words on paper and everyone respecting that a specific approach holds sway, that there are certain actions that when those words are put through a particular system, everyone abides by them, and if they don't, there are consequences. So there's a question there around how language can be weaponized potentially by AI, which is trained on large language models. I mean, that's the heart of what it does. being that I'm not an AI expert, but like that seems to me a fairly kind of fundamental question to approach. And the other side, I wanted to ask you about algorithmic discrimination. What can we do to mitigate that? So I just wanted to get them out because otherwise my mind will just skit across all these different interesting avenues. But which one do you want to go for first? The algorithmic discrimination or the language as potential weaponization for AI and what that does to democracy?
I think we can start from language and then move on into discrimination in the sense that they are connected as topics, in the sense that the weaponization of language, I think, is a very, I would say, big issue here, because there's no easy solution, in the sense that language, as we said, also for law, is very often interpreted in a context. So we can't separate the language, the words, from the context in which they're placed. And in a way, this contextual approach to the law, where, as I was mentioning earlier on, allows judges, allows legal professionals to put words into a wider environment, and therefore also create, we can say, relations, correlations between words and actions and meaning, depending on a set of factors that shape that environment, is crucial to legal reasoning, right? And algorithms, and in particular large language models, what they do essentially is that, in particular, AI tools such as ChatGPT, they predict the likelihood of certain words in a certain context, as I say.
Yeah.
So based on a prompt, ChatGPT predicts what is the likely word to appear after a certain number of words already, so to say, input in the system. So it's a different exercise, in the sense that ChatGPT simply is bases itself on a statistical almost prediction, right? But doesn't look at the actual context in which words, and therefore the law, are placed. And because of this, so to say, prediction element that ChatGPT has, we have also hallucination problems, in the sense that ChatGPT, drawing from different databases, different data sets, has demonstrated that some of the outputs that it produces simply does not match reality, because it comes up with words and ideas and concepts that simply go beyond even the data that has been fed into the algorithm. And this is, of course, absolutely worrisome. So I think that, in a way, we see already a weaponization of language, in the sense that language can be used also to, in a way, provide fake news, fake information that, if of course is to spread widely, could simply meddle with democracy and society, and this is a very powerful form of weaponization of language, and how it could also defeat sometimes even democracy. So, and this inevitably also links to bias, in the sense that because of the data that is used to feed the algorithm, and the AI in general, depending also on the different types of algorithm that can be used, what we see is that some of the pre-existing biases that are embedded in the data are simply then enshrined in the algorithm. And because of the speed at which the algorithm works, and also the wide range application of algorithms, what we see is that the bias enshrined in the data could then exponentially be also applied in the different fields in which the algorithms are used. And this, therefore, this exponential, so to say, diffusion of bias through algorithmic decision making, through automated decision making, could simply reinforce certain biases instead of fighting them. So basically, the entire purpose for which many advocate the use of AI, the fact that it can provide more reliable decision, more stable, and also even fairer decisions, is defeated because we are simply strengthening some of the biases that exist and that happen not at a such exponential scale. So the entire purpose of basically improving decision making and improving also sometimes society, some AI advocates claim so, are then defeated. So it seems to me that the weaponization of language and the bias issue really go hand in hand, and therefore we need to be very careful, in my view, about the uses of AI, in which fields we want AI, in which fields we think that AI could be perhaps helpful, and what kind of safeguards we need. And I think that regulation should really aim at this, at introducing safeguards, at also making the public aware of the risks of AI, and also providing, in a way, countermeasures to balance the risks of AI.
Okay, so there's the regulating piece, and then there's also attributing liability. Maybe let's go there first, because I think that's kind of, it's quite a pernicious and quite a difficult thing to unpack. So when it comes to technological services, whether they employ basic algorithms or something more sophisticated, who do we hold, or what do we hold accountable for any potential harms that might come, for instance, from systemic discrimination like you just described? Is it the creator of the AI system? Is it going to be, the person who uses them? Is it going to be, let's say you've got all these companies now, and I know some people who run some of these companies who are creating their services and products on a foundation of ChatGPT or OpenAI systems. Like,
yes,
what level do you attribute? Or it's like a multi-layer cake. Like, where do you,
yes,
where do you go to?
It is, in the sense that it is a multi-layer cake, in the sense
Just not as
that
tasty.
in the sense that in reality, all the different components of AI systems lead in a way to the discriminatory outcome. Now, I think that from a regulatory perspective, what makes sense is to identify the nest, one can say, of the liability in the hands of those who are more easily held accountable because of their power position, we can say, vis-a-vis the accuracy of, for example, a harmful or discriminatory decision. So, from this perspective, I think that there are good examples coming from the EU, where we have a liability directive that tries to allocate liability in an intelligent way, and basically uses it almost a product liability approach, in the sense that there is a presumption of damage that is entailed by the AI provider, the AI system provider, that can be rebutted. So in a way, again, using tools of pre-existing legislation, product liability, the EU is trying, so to say, to provide safeguards, to provide guardrails, and also ways in which the public can also become more trustworthy towards AI, because if the public, if consumers, for example, will be placed at a disadvantage and will receive even a harmful, so to say, decision by AI, or a harm in general from AI, they can, of course, claim damages, and they know that someone will be made accountable. Now, whether this is in a way reflective of the complexity of AI, I think it's another question. But I think that in a way, what we see here is that the liability, is grounded on the more immediate dynamic between a user and a provider of AI system. And I think that this makes sense. This is, so to say, an approach that can work better than others, because we have this direct correlation between the provider of the AI system and a user, while instead going back, of course, to the data set and for example, any pieces and any elements forming the AI system can be more problematic. Imagine a user needing to go back to those who provided the data set, right? That would place an incredible burden to individuals, right? To try to figure out what kind of data was harmful to them. Then, of course, there may be another layer of litigation between, for example, the AI provider and those who developed the technology, the algorithm, the database. But this could be solved perhaps at the pre-contractual perhaps phase, where those who want to use then AI system will need to receive guarantees from the developers, from those creating data sets, that their products are safe. So I think that it's a chain of liability, but I think it wouldn't be reasonable for the end user to go back and go against all these other entities, because it would simply be too cumbersome.
Yeah.
And also
Makes
very
me
difficult
think,
to enforce.
yes, complete. And who has the resources or the time for that? Like, makes me
Exactly.
think there's not quite the same thing, but like cookies, that the law was a good idea, or the intention was a good idea. But now, if you're on a website, anytime you go to a new website, or if you've got, like, I use Ghostery and ad blocker, you've got something that stops you from being tracked, you have to go through the cookie notifications and go through all the settings every single time. And it's
Yes.
just, like, who does that?
Yes.
So there was something else that was interesting that I thought would be curious to ask you about, which is the idea of regulating not for the technology, but for harms of that technology. Is that something that you can, like, expand a little on? Because I think that's a really interesting concept that's useful for folks like me who are not familiar
Yes.
with the legal profession to kind of get our heads around.
Absolutely. I think that the idea of regulating AI harms is quite powerful, in the sense that it looks at the effects of the technology. So it has some advantages, in the sense that it is a quite malleable approach. We're looking at harms that materialize in a way, and that therefore are taken on or taken forward um, uh, through, for example, complaints with regulators, or litigation. So in a way, this approach has the benefit of fighting the right battles, in the sense that when a harm concretizes itself, then we can talk about ways to redress it. So there is this certainly beneficial aspect of regulating harms, but the question of harms is also quite complex to grasp, in the sense that there might be different harms for different categories of society, which is reflective of the fact that different individuals may be placed at different risks vis-a-vis the technology, vis-a-vis AI. So again, how we concretize the harm, what is a harm? I think that would be quite difficult to put into regulatory terms, in the sense that we need a definition of harm that is sufficiently precise, but at the same time also encompasses a number of harms that we may not think of already.
Yeah.
So the harm approach normally goes into an ex post regulatory approach, right? We first so to say, allow the introduction of the technology, we see how it works, and then we tackle the harm. So it's a very pragmatic approach, but at the same time has some drawbacks. What do we mean by harm? Are we perhaps cutting out some harms that we cannot think of yet? And in any event, I mean, this puts nonetheless a burden on the end user, right? Because the end user will have to fight the battle, both in terms of time and resources. While instead an ex-ante approach, the product safety approach that has been used by the EU, wants to avoid as much as possible this ex post litigation, this ex post conflict that might emerge once the technology has been in place, and therefore wants to provide a redress even before, so to say, the harm materializes. This doesn't mean, nonetheless, that the ex-ante approach won't have some harms concretizing, but it's a more paternalistic approach where, so to say, we want to avoid harms as early as possible. It's an early detection strategy. So again, there are drawbacks and also for the ex-ante approach, nevertheless, because as I said, harms cannot be entirely eradicated, and at the same time as well, some of the harms that we can think of at an ex-ante regulatory level might not be the entirety of the harms that we can think of. I think probably a combination of the two is necessary, in the sense that some of the more fundamental harms should be, in a way, preempted by way of ex-ante regulation, but we also need some ex-post regulatory tools that allow an effective tackling of harms that could not be tackled at an ex-ante level. And I think that in any event, there is no perfect regulation. So I cannot think of a law that is perfect, right? Because of the polycentricity of interests, of values that come into play in society. So there is no regulation that is perfect and that is entirely effective. So also for AI, saying that we cannot achieve a perfect regulation, so and therefore we should not regulate, is simply not reflective of reality and the law. So again, I think that some regulation, even though it's not perfect, can still be more helpful than no regulation, where basically we have no safeguards. So we should be perhaps less ambitious, but through a step-by-step approach, a spillover effect, and also progression by stealth, almost, we can perhaps slowly achieve a better regulation.
It's interesting because I've been following a lot of the news recently with different companies offering ethical declarations to great fanfare, and but none of this is legally binding. And we know from Google's early days, "Don't be evil." It's like, well, that didn't really, there's just kind of, so there's something really, it feels like to me there's something extremely immature about a society that takes profit-driven companies at their word when they say, "Oh yeah, we're not going to hurt you, but we're going to just pay lip service to something," when actually the motivations are very clear, which are profit. I don't hold much faith in that sort of, what's the word, like elective process yielding any fruit. But so then let me ask you this. There's two more things I want to ask before we move to sort of the closing questions. And I realized as we're talking that we focus predominantly on the potential harms and regulation, and because also I think that's what law is really good at doing, at creating boundaries and setting parameters within which then harm reduction is achieved and people can flourish hopefully more freely. That's kind of the world that I would like to live in without being too constrictive. And so, and again, that's a balance. But so I wonder, what are some of your hopes around what AI can bring to not just law, but society as a whole?
I think that, as I said, any form of progress allows some wins and entails also some losses, in the sense that inevitably, I think, giving now a very banal example, but I think something that is quite representative of the historical moment we're living. Think about cars, right? Or any other technology in that field. Inevitably, cars have facilitated transportation and have made connections much easier, have made individuals more independent and also able to travel and therefore also reach further distances. But at the same time, one can say that, well, cars have also fostered a way of living that is not necessarily as healthy because it has limited, for example, the time that individuals were spending engaging into physical activities, walking, spending time in the nature, and also doing activities that are essentially also beneficial for human beings, right? But at the same time, again, of course, a balance can be found where we also realize that cars may be also a source of pollution, a source of damage for the environment, and therefore we're rebalancing perhaps how much we should use cars, right? There's policies now across the UK, across many jurisdictions where we see that there's a fight against using cars as much as possible because of the damage that it has on lifestyle, but also the environment. So I think, so this is a very, I would say, immediate example of how technology entails some gains, but also some losses. And as a society, through law, through regulation, we're trying to rebalance the gains and the losses. So when thinking about AI, what I hope is that we, as a society, become more aware of the risks of AI, and also, above all, that we don't lose faith in humans, and we try also to see this almost existential societal crisis that we are undergoing, faced with the power of AI. I really hope that we can, in a way, rebalance, so to say, the gains and the losses that we can have as a society as a whole. And what do I mean by that? That perhaps we take this technological development also to recalibrate the importance of environment, the importance of some values that perhaps are becoming, I think, also more important for every individual. But they should become also more important for the society at large, in the sense that we're talking about fairness, we're talking about non-discrimination, we're talking about equality, we're talking about also the importance that art and creativity can have in society. I was talking with some friends and colleagues, and but also members of the artistic community, who are absolutely terrified of the developments of AI. And I think that the terror and the scare that AI is entailing for artists is something that should talk to us. Shouldn't we protect art? Shouldn't we protect the ability to create ideas, the ability to generate powerful visual images that can shake, in a way, our consciousness, our ways of thinking, right? And as an art had an important role in our society. And shouldn't we perhaps also not lose sight of these values that perhaps are not necessarily driven by money and market, but they are also so important for our psyche, for our world, and for the beauty, in a way, that has allowed the flourishing of our society, right? So I think that, I hope that from the crisis, from the chaos, we will come out as a more balanced society. That is my hope, from, so to say, a very, one can say, almost philosophical point of view. But then talking about more tangible matters, I hope that again we as a society will manage to embed AI in a way that can foster some good, we can say, in the society, some good objectives, some good goals, and can also help us fight there for good causes. That
Yeah.
would be my hope.
I love that. And to complete that, because I'm thinking about, and obviously this is your domain. So, are there any laws or developments in the world of law in Europe or beyond that are giving you a sense of people kind of being on the right track? So whether it's like a new AI law that's coming into play, or is there anything that
Yes,
you've kind of got on the horizon that you can point people towards and say, "Look
yes,
here, this is good."
I think so. Looking at the regulatory space, we see a variety of approaches, right? In the sense that in the EU we have a proposal for a new AI Act that is seriously thinking about guardrails, is seriously thinking about protections for individuals. Not all in that proposal, I think, is workable and would actually achieve the intended results, but I think it's a good starting point. The essence of the framework is that AI basically is a tool, is a product, and in particular, systems that are classified as high risk should respect some safety product requirements, so to say. And therefore, this will put a burden on producers to make sure that they produce safe AI and trustworthy AI. Whether this will become a ticking box exercise, there's certainly a risk, but nonetheless, I think it's a starting point, is a step towards trying to think about AI that can work for humans and not vice versa. It will foster a human-centric approach to AI, which I think is a good development. Thinking about the risks of AI and also the anxiety that AI basically is causing to
Yeah.
individuals. There were declarations by individuals who have contributed towards the development of AI that basically this technology could end humanity. I don't think that is necessarily accurate. There are some risks, of course, and we shouldn't underscore them. But on the other hand, I think that this might be too far fetched. So again, the truth is in the middle, and I think that the EU regulatory approach in this field is taking the risks of AI more seriously. But we see also that some concerns have emerged in the US, where of course, Silicon Valley has flourished and has helped as well also the development of this very technology. And what I found extremely interesting is that in the US, there is some discussion around the risks of AI that have concretized into a proposal, the AI Bill of Rights. This is a non-binding document, but nonetheless, it has a quite powerful symbolic value in the sense that the government is making clear that AI has some risks, and therefore they should be made, so to say, expressed. They should be expressed. They should be articulated into an AI Bill of Rights. And what I thought was also very interesting in this document that was adopted in late 2022 is that one of the core principles is that there should be a human alternative to AI decision making, basically, which hints to the fact that, well, AI is not necessarily always the best option.
Yeah.
So again, this document is non-binding. It explicitly says that it does not create any rights, and any obligation. So again, the very purpose of having this document is perhaps defeated, but it's quite symbolic in the sense that a government, a jurisdiction like the United States of America, where AI is so important and also crucial in the market, is signaling that, well, there are some risks and we should at least be mindful of those. And again, it's a more cautious approach that I think might lead to interesting regulatory developments. While instead in the UK, we see that the core value is innovation.
Yeah.
There are some principles that have been proposed through a UK white paper that basically will rely on existing regulators for their enforcement. So the regulators, for example, for the equality legislation, for the communication sector, for the data protection sector, and so on, all these regulators will be tasked with the duty to enforce these AI principles, so to say. But there are some very practical questions. Know-how. Do these regulators have the know-how to tackle AI challenges? And also the staff resources. Do they have sufficient staff resources to deal with all the different applications of AI that are emerging? And again, it seems that the entire framework is really fostering innovation, and it's losing a bit sight of the broader societal issues that AI brings with it. So there is some discussion, which I think it's good, but I think again, how we tackle these risks might have very powerful implications on society, and I would wish to see hardcore laws adopted in this field that might not be the ultimate solution, but that would provide some safeguards.
So to close this part of the podcast, then, with all of the things that you have to think about, and the scope and scale of it, how do you orient yourself towards life and beauty when things get tough?
Oh well, I think that it's so interesting because in reality, when we think about these developments, it's inevitable also to feel quite disempowered because the as individuals we're not necessarily able to shape directly these developments, right? So how do we stay grounded? How do we, so to say, cope with these very fast moving changes, right? I think that these sudden changes can have some traumatic aspects to them in the sense that we were used to think that we had some points of references that our job would have stayed there. But then, of course, technology and AI come in the picture, and of course, everything becomes shaky and uncertain. So I think that you rightly said that how do we, so to say, look for something that could make us feel, so to say, better, that could help us tackle these challenges. And I agree with you that beauty, so to say, and peace of mind inevitably could are something that could help us to better tackle these challenges. And I think that one way to do this is that first of all, not to feel disempowered, right? The fact that in reality we're not as disempowered as we think, in the sense that by talking to others, by engaging with this topic, and also simply spreading awareness, spreading ideas, can have more powerful effects than we could think, because this can create a social movement where basically there is a response, there is a reaction to this innovation-driven approach to AI. So I think that not feeling completely disempowered is step one, I would say, and reading and making ourselves aware, right? I think that awareness is always the first step. And then I think that, again, everyone has different ways of coping with anxiety and stress. And I think that we should perhaps cut ourselves some slack and say that, well, that's pretty hardcore, which might mean that we need to reevaluate some aspects of our job, of skills perhaps that we want to develop, of projects that we want to undertake, that that might, so to say, contribute towards, so to say, empowering us and also make us feel useful and also having a certain role to play. And yes, I think that again, trying to shape the debate, trying to not lose faith as well is very, very important, because we've done as a society quite incredible things, and quite beautiful things sometimes. Not all of them, of course, but there is so much out there that as humans we were able to produce that is quite astonishing. So thinking that that we managed to have some good impact, and not all of it, but good impact on livelihoods and humans, I think it's quite nice thought, right? We did some good things too, right? We have destroyed the planet in some parts of the world, but we're becoming aware of this, and we can do something, and we should do something, and yeah, I think that not losing faith is key, perhaps.
Yeah, I love that. So briefly then, if people want to find out more about your work, what are the best places to find you? Like LinkedIn? What websites do you want to direct people towards?
I'm active on Twitter. I'm active on LinkedIn, and yes, and you can find my work, my publications, my research on AI, and especially fundamental rights. Yes, on these platforms. And yes, of course, I'm always available also to chat and to discuss as much as I can, within the constraints of my academic work and my research and my teaching and my conferences, because and my traveling for conferences sometimes, which I try to reduce, but because of environmental concerns. But yeah, I genuinely care about these issues. So as much as I can, I try to talk to people, to spread ideas in this field.
Well, and thank you very much for talking with me, and for the people listening.
Thanks for having
with them
me.
as well.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. That was brilliant.